The night was thick with the silence of the desert, broken only by the distant howl of a lone wolf. In a grand palace, dimly lit by flickering torches, a man sat on a throne, his face twisted in a cruel grin. This was Herod, the ruler of Judea, a man feared and despised by many. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room, looking for any sign of defiance. The air was heavy with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Herod's voice cut through the silence like a blade, his words dripping with menace. "Speak not, or I shall have you silenced," he bellowed. "All that I will decree must be followed without question. Stir not unless I give you leave, for if you do, I will cleave you as small as flesh to a pot." The audience, a mix of nobles and commoners, shrank back in fear. Herod's threat was more than just words. It was a stark reminder of the violence he was capable of. His promise to cut them into pieces, like meat being prepared for a pot, echoed the darkest fears of the crowd. This was no ordinary king. Herod was a tyrant, a man who ruled through fear and cruelty. Yet for all his power, Herod was deeply troubled. Rumors had been circulating of a new king, a child who would challenge his authority. The thought of a rival, especially one so young, filled Herod with a burning rage. He had already tried to silence the whispers by threatening his audience, but the rumors persisted. Desperate to find proof or disproof, Herod decided to take matters into his own hands. "Un spake in mine ear a wondrous tale," Herod declared, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "They say a maiden shall bear a child who will be king. Sirs, I pray you, search your books and find me the truth." Herod's advisors, a group of learned men known as his clerks, were tasked with the impossible. They were to scour ancient texts, from the works of Virgil and Homer to the scriptures of the prophets, for any hint of this prophecy. Herod was careful to direct them, telling them to avoid certain texts he considered irrelevant. "Seek through Virgil, Homer, and all other things but legends," he instructed. "Ignore the epistles and the psalms, and do not waste time with the mass or matins. I want your findings now." The advisors, well aware of Herod's temper, nodded obediently and set to work. They scoured their books, searching for any clue that might satisfy their king. However, as they delved deeper, they began to uncover references that Herod did not expect. They found prophecies in Isaiah and other ancient texts that spoke of a virgin birth and a king born in Bethlehem. When the advisors returned, their faces were pale with fear. They delivered the news that confirmed Herod's worst fears. "We have found it, my lord," one of them stammered. "The prophecies speak of a child who will be king, born in Bethlehem." Herod's face darkened with rage. He had hoped to find something that would disprove the rumors, but instead he had only confirmed them. His control over the kingdom was slipping, and the thought of a rival, a child no less, was unbearable. His anger boiled over, and he lashed out at his advisors. "Thou canst not half thy creed," he shouted, his voice trembling with fury. "Out, thieves, from my presence! Fie, knaves! Fie, dolts, with your books! Go cast them in the brooks!" Herod's command to destroy the books was a desperate act, a final attempt to deny the truth. But deep down, he knew it was too late. The prophecies were written, and the child was already born. The wheels of fate were turning, and no amount of violence or destruction could stop them. The crowd watched in horror as Herod's advisors, under threat of death, began to gather the books. They knew that this act of bibliographic violence was more than just the destruction of texts. It was an attempt to erase the past and deny the future. But the true irony was that Herod, in his desperation, had only confirmed the very prophecies he sought to deny. As the advisors carried the books away, the tension in the room grew. Herod's tyranny was clear, but so was the futility of his actions. The prophecies would be fulfilled, and the child king would rise, no matter what Herod did. The night was long, and the silence of the desert seemed to mock the tyrant's futile struggle against the inevitable. In the days that followed, Herod's rage only grew. He ordered the slaughter of all male children under the age of 2 in Bethlehem, a brutal act that would forever stain his name. But even as the blood was spilled, the prophecy stood, and the child king, protected by his divine destiny, would survive. Herod's tyranny was a tragic tale of a man who could not accept the changing tides of history, and whose violence only ensured the very outcome he feared. In the English plays about the massacre of the innocents, the timing of events varies. Some plays, like those from Digby, Endtown, Chester, and Coventry, show the angel warning Joseph after Herod orders his soldiers to kill the children, but before they enter Bethlehem. This makes it seem like a close call. In the Townley and York plays, however, the escape to Egypt happens in a separate play, before the massacre. This shows that God's plan is already in motion, and the angel knows what will happen even before Herod does. It's like God's time is different from human time, and Herod's actions can't change what's already been foretold. Herod tries to control events by reading and acting on prophecies, but this doesn't work. His attempts to alter the future just create more complex and unpredictable outcomes. For example, when the soldiers meet the mothers in Bethlehem, the mothers resist in ways that create a powerful and chaotic scene. They use words and physical actions to fight back, and this brings together different times and cultures in a way that defies Herod's control. The mothers are often seen as unruly women, but their resistance is not just about disobeying authority. It's also about protecting their children and challenging the idea that Herod can control time and destiny. In the Townley play, the mother's resistance is especially powerful because they use time as a weapon. When Herod sends his soldiers to kill the children, he tries to act like a courtly and gracious ruler, but this is out of place in the context of a massacre. His courtly language and the way he rewards his men make the violence even more absurd and tragic. One of the soldiers tries to be polite when he asks the first mother for permission to kill her child, but she calls him a thief. This insult is significant because it's a word used to cry for help in medieval times, and it also foreshadows the fate of Christ, who was crucified between thieves. The mother's words bring together different times, and make the soldier's courtly language seem hollow and inappropriate. The play shows the massacre in a structured way, with each encounter following a similar pattern. A soldier approaches a mother, the mother expresses fear, the soldier reveals his intentions, the mother insults and threatens the soldier, the mother physically attacks the soldier kills the child, and the mother laments. This repetition makes the violence seem like it's happening over and over again, and it echoes the structure of earlier religious plays. These plays often used repetition to show the fulfillment of prophecies, like the grief of Rachel in the book of Jeremiah and Mary's grief over Christ's death. The mother's laments are especially powerful. They express their grief and call for vengeance, and their words connect their suffering to the suffering of Mary. This makes their pain part of Christ's suffering, and sets the stage for the innocents to be seen as the first Christian martyrs. The second mother's speech, in particular, emphasizes the innocence of her child and the injustice of what is happening. She calls for God to take vengeance on Herod and his soldiers, and her words are designed to evoke a strong emotional response from the audience. The play's structure and the mother's speeches create a sense of time folding in on itself. The audience is invited to experience the anguish of the mothers in Bethlehem, the grief of Mary at the cross, and the moral implications of Herod's actions. This makes the play more than just a retelling of a biblical story. It's a powerful emotional and ethical experience that challenges the audience to think about the nature of time, justice, and human suffering. In the Townley play, the mothers of the murdered children in Bethlehem cry out for vengeance, a call that echoes through time but finds no answer. Unlike in the Hebrew Bible, where God punishes Cain for killing Abel, or in other medieval plays where Herod is eventually punished, the Townley mothers' cries seem to fall on deaf ears. Their grief is intense, and their plea for justice is powerful, but it does not bring about the divine retribution that might be expected. This difference is significant because it highlights a shift in the way the divine interacts with the world. In the Hebrew Bible, God is often portrayed as actively protecting his chosen people, like when the blood of the Passover lamb saves the Israelites' firstborn sons. But in the Townley play, the mothers are left to grieve without divine intervention. Their children are not protected, and they do not receive the comfort that other characters in similar situations might get, such as a visit from an angel who tells them their children will be martyrs. The play also folds together different moments from biblical history, connecting the massacre of the innocents with the crucifixion of Christ, the Passover, and even the first murder in Genesis. However, these connections often emphasize the differences rather than the similarities. For example, while the crucifixion involves one child dying for many, the massacre of the innocents involves many children dying for the sake of one. This inversion underscores the complexity of the narrative and the idea that time is not always linear or straightforward. Herod, the villain of the play, tries to control time and prevent the prophecy about the new king from coming true. He believes that by killing all the male children, he can tear a page out of the scriptural timeline and save his own rule. But the mother's resistance, though it does not save their children, disrupts Herod's plan in a different way. Their voices create new folds in time, bringing together different biblical moments and challenging Herod's attempt to dictate the future. The play's audience, unlike the characters, has a broader perspective on the narrative. They know the outcome and understand the significance of the events unfolding on stage. This knowledge creates a kind of temporal tension, as the audience watches the characters struggle with a fate they cannot escape. Herod's attempts to control time are ultimately futile, and his triumph is short-lived. The play's ending, where Herod boasts about his deeds, is ironic because it sets the stage for his eventual downfall and the fulfillment of the prophecy he tried to prevent. The Townley play, therefore, explores the idea that time is not a simple, linear progression, but a complex, interconnected web. The characters' interactions with this web, whether through resistance, control, or grief, reveal the tensions and contradictions within the narrative. The mothers, in their grief and resistance, become powerful figures who, despite their lack of control, manage to disrupt the tyrant's plans and assert the complexity of the divine narrative. Their voices, though unanswered, leave a lasting imprint on the story, reminding us that even in moments of tragedy, there is a deeper, more intricate tapestry at play. In 2016, I watched a performance of the York Mystery Plays at York Minster. The plays are a series of short stories from the Bible, acted out by actors. As I watched, something interesting happened. The actor playing Jesus was being questioned by Herod, Annas, Caiaphas, and Pilate. These characters were so incompetent, and their arguments so full of holes, that I started to think Jesus would be let off. Even though I knew the story and what would happen next, I found myself hoping and almost believing that Jesus would be freed. This experience is common for anyone who has seen a play they know well. For example, in King Lear, we feel a surge of joy when Edgar defeats his brother, even though we know the worst is yet to come. In Romeo and Juliet, we hope the letter from Friar Lawrence reaches Romeo in time to stop the tragedy. We might think Dr. Faustus will repent at the last minute, or that Oedipus will stop investigating his past before the truth is revealed. We might even think, along with Vladimir and Estragon in Waiting for Godot, that Godot will finally show up. Really, he will any moment now. When we watch a live performance of a familiar play, we have to think in two ways at once. On one hand, we know what will happen because we've seen it before. On the other hand, we have to pretend we don't know, so we can feel the emotions the characters are experiencing. This is called doublethink. Medieval audiences experience this too. There's an old text called the Treatise of Miracles Plange that talks about how people watching these plays would get very emotional. The text says that people would cry because of what they saw on stage, but not necessarily because of their own sins or faith. They were moved by what they saw happening in the play. In medieval times, these plays were a way for people to connect with the stories of the Bible. They were more than just entertainment. They were a way to teach and to feel the emotions of the characters. The plays were performed in churches and public spaces, and the actors often used simple props and costumes to tell these complex stories. The audience's emotional response was a sign that the performance was working, that it was making the stories come alive. One of the most powerful moments in these plays is when Herod orders the massacre of the innocent children. In the play, Herod is often depicted as a tyrant, and the scene where he orders the killing of the children is very dramatic. The mothers of the children are shown as grieving and fighting back, which can be very moving for the audience. Even though the audience knows the story, seeing it acted out can still be very powerful. The way these plays were performed also allowed for a lot of interaction between the actors and the audience. Sometimes, the audience would even get involved in the action. This made the stories feel more real and immediate. The actors had to be very skilled at making the audience believe in what was happening on stage, even if the audience knew the outcome. In the end, watching these plays required a special kind of engagement from the audience. They had to balance their knowledge of the story with their emotional response to what was happening on stage. This doublethink is a powerful way to experience a story, and it's something that continues to captivate audiences today. The York Mystery Plays, performed annually, brought the Bible to life for medieval audiences in a way that was both familiar and deeply engaging. Over time, these performances created a unique relationship between the audience and the plays. People knew the stories from the Bible, and they also knew how the plays would unfold each year. This deep familiarity meant that the audience had a special kind of foreknowledge about what was going to happen, which added layers of meaning and emotion to their experience. In the play, The Fall of the Angels, for example, the audience knew from the start that Lucifer, despite his boasts and pride, would fall from grace. This knowledge made his confident speeches all the more ironic, and at times comical. When Lucifer declared, "I saw me like Vientio him that is shyest on het," the audience understood that this was a hollow boast, and they could anticipate his downfall. This anticipation created a bond between the audience and God, who in the play seems to have foreknowledge of Lucifer's fall and the creation of hell. The audience, in a sense, shared God's perspective, experiencing a blend of eternal and temporal time. However, this foreknowledge also had its darker side. In some cases, the audience's familiarity with the plays led to unexpected and sometimes disruptive behavior. For instance, the play about Fergus, which involved a Jew being dragged along by the Virgin Mary's bier, often provoked violent reactions from the audience. The Masons, who were responsible for staging this play, complained that it caused more laughter, noise, and even fights than it did devotion. This suggests that the audience used their foreknowledge to actively participate in the play, sometimes in ways that were not intended. The audience's role in these performances was not just passive. They were deeply involved, and their reactions could influence the tone and direction of the play. This interplay between the performers and the audience created a dynamic and sometimes unpredictable experience. The plays, in turn, often acknowledged this relationship, using the audience's foreknowledge to enhance the dramatic effect. For example, Lucifer's boasts were more powerful because the audience knew what was coming, and this knowledge made his fall all the more impactful. In the end, the York Mystery Plays were more than just a retelling of biblical stories. They were a communal event that brought people together, allowing them to share in the timeless narrative of creation, fall, and redemption. The audience's foreknowledge, while giving them a godlike perspective, also reminded them of their own mortality and the consequences of their actions. The plays, through their annual repetition, created a living tradition that was both a celebration of faith and a reflection on the human condition.